Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Anthony Johnson, CEO and founder of the biotech company Codicaz.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawksbland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. We're thrilled that you're here with us this morning for our virtual breakfast series. Derek, at some point, you and I should count. So each week we can say the 20th one or the 21st, whatever it is.
We're, we're well over 20 at this point. I think we're pushing about 25.
So we have Anthony Johnson, CEO at Codicaz, with us today. So we're really interested and we're going to have a great discussion on all things genomic with him today in New York. So it's a perfect combination for our audience. We thank you to our sponsor, TriNet, who has sponsored our breakfast for the months of September and October. So we really appreciate their partnership. And now I will kick it over to you, Derek, to introduce Anthony, and then we'll start chatting. One last thing, I always forget this. Matter of housekeeping, if you have questions, and we hope you do, ask them as we're having conversations through the Q&A or the chat feature below. We'll see those and we'll be able to lob those into Anthony at the appropriate time. So thanks.
All right. Well, Anthony, good morning. And kind of the best intro that I can think of here is the way that I heard of Codicaz is Bob Easton, who is a friend of mine and on the board of New York Bio. When he mentioned Codicaz, he said, "You have to check out this company. I haven't been as excited about a company, as excited about a company more than this in as long as I can remember." And Bob has forgotten more about biotech than I will ever know. And that's about the most ringing endorsement I could ever think of for a startup biotech company. So welcome to the webinar. It's great to have you here. And just for the audience, the way that I'll describe Codicaz is it's a gene therapy company whose platform can direct the gene therapies to any kind of cell type it wants. Is that fair?
That is fair. That is a good assessment. Correct.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more. But do you want to talk a little bit about really how you got to where you are? How did you find Codicaz? Where did you come from? And where did you get to where you are today?
All right, thanks. Well, listen, first of all, it's a pleasure. Thanks you and Jennifer for having us on this podcast. It's great to hear the insights of people in the community, and I'm humbled and honored to be here. And obviously, Bob, it comes with great accord in terms of, like you said, Bob has known a lot about biotech and has been in the space for a number of years. And about a year ago, we came down to New York City looking for space. And the background on Codicaz is it's a technology that we licensed from Emory University. And I had known the founder of Codicaz, a guy by the name of Leon Bernal, for over 10 plus years. And I had worked with him in previous work that I had done. He's a hematologist out of Emory. And he comes to me about 4 years ago and says, "Hey, Anthony, I think I have this great technology that allows us to pinpoint specific cancer cells." And I was like, "Oh, that's great." And at the time I was running Empire Genomics, and we were a molecular diagnostics company. So we had licensed technology from Leon's lab that is used as a companion diagnostic, and that's how I came to know him. So he's a very passionate scientist. He's from Columbia, and not Columbia University, but Columbia, the country. And we just bond on a lot of different areas. So he's very passionate about treating patients, and he's one of these physicians that would literally treat patients with his own cash base, right, to make sure, they get the care they need, and gives away his cell phone number. And he's just one of the smartest individuals I know. So when he told me about this technology, I was excited, but it was very early stage. And so over the course kind of the 4 years or so, he's been working on the technology, and I wound up transitioning out of Empire and was looking for kind of my next opportunity. And this one kind of just literally fell in my lap. It's one in which, as you said, Derek, this technology, we call it zip code based technology. So what it allows us to do is to specifically hit cancer cells and not other cells in the body. And that obviously has a lot of different advantages. The most important part is the hardest part about treating cancer is finding where the cancer is, right? And so
Right.
I think it's pretty interesting that we're located in BioLabs right here at the Holland Tunnel, because I think of our technology as a vehicle. It's a way to deliver a variety of different payloads specifically to these cancer cells. And so the derivation of the name Codicaz is a play on the Greek word for code. And what we think we found is an archaic process of horizontal gene transfer that we found now in humans. It's been widely known in the fungal and bacteria community, but we found this actually in humans. And so that's what we're exploiting with Codicos. And that's just a bit of the background in terms of what we're doing and how we got here. And I think what excites me so much about Codicos is, I mean, first and foremost, it's the passion of the founder, the scientists that we've been able to bring around and garner. Guys like Bob Langer and Bob Easton are people who obviously have an awful lot of experience in the space. And I think that everyone realizes that if we're able to do what we think this technology can do, it's going to be a complete game changer in terms of how we actually manage chronic diseases, right? And we're starting off with oncology applications, but we'll, I think, exploit this or try to exploit this in other different disease areas as well.
Yeah. So can you talk about what did it for you? What was the first thing? What was the moment that clicked and said, yep, this is the one? You know,
Yeah.
was there a particular thing about the technology? Did it kind of take a while to get there? How did you make the decision? How did you say this is the thing that I want to do?
Yeah, it took a while. It took a long time. It took for me probably in terms of from the time I heard of it 4 years ago to the time that we just started to actually start the company was late 2018, early 2019. It really was a technology that sold me first and foremost, right? I mean, this is a technology that if you're going to take a risk and start a business and working in a space like oncology that is crowded and littered with a lot of incremental sort of innovations, you want to have something that's going to be worth its while if you're able to make it successful. And so this technology with its exquisite nature to be able to specifically hit cancer cells, it's something that first and foremost, it's intriguing, right? I mean, the thought process is that, and for me, it kind of comes full circle. I've worked in stem cell biology, and cancer is known to be stem cells that have kind of gone rogue. And one of the biggest issues is how do you actually pick these cells out and where they go, and how do you know that you're actually hitting a cancer cell? And so what took place is that that the early data that Leon showed me literally was just kind of in multiple myeloma and pancreatic cancer, showing that he's able to deliver various kind of fluorescent sort of fragments into these cells. And I was like, that's great, but it's a cell cartridge based, right? The cell lines, we know that these things
Right.
always work in cell lines, but usually never as you go further down the path. But as we started learning more and more about the technology and the story, it started really actually making fairly logical sense when you started looking at previous publications were out there. And one of the people that I think that add a lot of value in terms of what we're doing is, and I'm sure you guys know him, is Steve Chang, right? So Steve Chang is widely known in the community. I don't think there's anyone that Steve doesn't know, basically, right? He worked in the
He
early
knows
years.
everybody.
Exactly, right? So Steve knows everyone. And so we started talking back at JP Morgan about a year and a half ago. And it seems like ages ago, obviously, right? But JP Morgan, if that ever comes back with this COVID situation. But we started talking and Steve was like, wow, this sounds like some retroviral stuff I was dealing with 20 years ago. And he was like, the issues we had with P53 was always the issue of delivery, right? And efficient transfection. And so if you're able to do this, here are some of the things you can do. And so he started giving us a lot more background science and adding value to what Leon had already discovered and helping to guide where we were moving down the path of some in vivo studies and how these zip codes actually could work. And once we actually got to the point where we knew we had a synthetic fragment that could replicate what we were seeing in the in vivo context, to me, that was a complete game changer base, right? And really then it becomes a story of biological engineering and product manufacturing as opposed to just kind of your pure basic science research of what do we actually have here.
Well, this is a first because we're less than 10 minutes into the webinar. The first question we have is who and how do you contact the company to invest? So that's a pretty good sign we're off to a good start. We'll get you there.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting. I think a lot about there's a story about how Moderna was formed that Newbar from Flagship told Stefan Bankal, you have to come see me right now. I'm not going to go through the whole story with the scientist, but he basically sketched out on a napkin what the idea was behind Moderna, and he showed it to Stefan, and Stefan said, I don't think that's going to work. And Newbar looked at him and he said, I'm not going to argue with about the data, but imagine what it would mean if it did. And and Stefan says, yep, he got me. You got me. And this is another one of those platforms that just has amazing potential if we think about what we know about cellular biology and what we know about cancer. So if we wind the clock back, you were the CEO of Empire Genomics for
Yep.
about 12 years. And, the background there is a diagnostics company out of Buffalo. And, how did that, we can talk a little bit about Empire too, because I'm really interested about what it was like to start a company in Buffalo. But did that really impact what you were trying to think about in your next steps? Did you genuinely want to do something outside of the diagnostic space, or how did that impact what you were thinking in terms of starting Codicause?
Yeah, it totally did, right? I mean, so I think you think about kind of starting a business, and we started Empire back in, there are a lot of, I think, parallels and corollaries. We started Empire in 07, 08, and if anybody recalls, that was kind of the economic recession basically, right? So I'm quite used to starting businesses during these kind of down periods or times of a lot of turmoil, I would say, basically. And so what guided me into kind of the next step I was looking at after Empire is that the diagnostic community is one in which, I mean, and obviously COVID right now is bringing it, I think, to full right in our face, if you will, is that there are a lot of issues with distribution channels in the service businesses of diagnostics. And diagnostics are one of these areas that have been, I think, kind of the stepchild of the healthcare industry. Everyone knows they get testing done, but very few people know what goes in actually making that test come to fruition and how really specific or sensitive that assay is. You just take it and kind of on face value that my number is this, therefore I do this with it. And so the challenge is starting a diagnostic company in Buffalo and obviously a part of New York State, it brings with it a lot of different issues, right? The regulation of New York State are one of the things that makes it very difficult to get anything done. And obviously there's a lot of reasons for that, but it was very punitive for us in terms of trying to actually get off the ground because we had to go through so many different hurdles and investments to be able to get our clinical certification, whereas literally companies right down the road in either Ohio or Pennsylvania could start a business tomorrow with very little capital and have their clinical certification and really start processing patient samples. So diagnostics was one in which I was jaded by the fact of how little impact we were able to have, though it should be a lot greater, right? Because diagnostics should drive what we're doing from a clinical perspective. And so what I was really looking for in my next opportunity was a way to really impact patients, right? And impact patients in a profound manner. And obviously therapies are one way of doing that. It just so happens that with this technology and the breadth of it is that these zip codes are actually in circulation being generated by cancer patients. So the technology actually is an end-to-end solution. We're just talking about the therapeutics because that's our area of focus as Codicause. But obviously there are applications for in vivo imaging with these zip codes. There's screening and monitoring, and then also diagnostics. So it kind of comes full circle, but we're focused on the therapeutic therapeutic aspects of the technology. And so what Empire taught me literally in this entire process is a couple things. One is you have to have smart people around the table basically, right? And so Dr. Norman Nowak, who's the founder of Empire Genomics and who has been in the cancer field literally since the early days of the genome base, right? And in fact, the sequence used for the human genome came from a couple of individuals from Buffalo who were the donors of that actual sequence, which was the founding technology we use for Empire's technology. And so I think that Leon and kind of Dr. Nowak are parallels in that they're very both interesting people and then also passionate about healthcare and wicked smart about the science, right? And I think that's what really drives where you can move it. The difference is that what we have in Codicause is a patentable technology and one that is kind of a complete game changer. And what we had at Empire Genomics at the time and what we were starting with was incremental improvements on existing genome technologies out there. And we're able to leverage that through distribution channels, manufacturing, and marketing to create an entire new segment of diagnostics, which in our case was customized FISH assays, right? So I think what that's kind of, if that gives you, I guess, the answer of why kind of Codicause and what I learned kind of in what we were doing with Empire Genomics and how it's literally driving what we're doing and some of the aspects of the business.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, talk to us a little bit about starting a company in Buffalo, right? Because we have members and guests today from all over the state and a lot of early stage folks too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would tell you that, I mean, literally it's pretty intriguing to see kind of the parallels of New York City biotech versus Buffalo, right? And Buffalo, literally the genesis of all the things we were doing with Empire is that New York State started making investment in the area, right? They started with these centers of excellence. So in Buffalo, it was literally healthcare and trying to revitalize the Rust Belt, as it were, economy. And so you see this entire ecosystem that is created, right? And it started with obviously some funding. So we had some early stage funds that were there early on. We built this, what's called the Center of Excellence in Bioinformatics and Life Sciences. And in fact, Empire was one of the first commercial tenants in that space. And literally to watch that grow and over the period of kind of 12 or 13 years, be filled to capacity and see other things come online, like the Trico building, it was just, it's very, one, humbling and gratifying to see how that community has developed. And what you've seen is that at the time we started, there was a group that now is called Athenex, right? That is a publicly traded company that literally was a technology that came out of SUNY Buffalo. And so that company has done very well. It's grown, it's expanded into manufacturing. You've seen an awful lot of employees that have been relocated to Buffalo to take over management positions in that business. There was groups like IMCO Diagnostics that was sold to Trinity. So what you see is that it starts kind of with the idea, you get the investment in space, and then with that, you already have great institutions that are producing technologies. And so it really becomes kind of a game of this timing and staying around long enough and making sure that you have leaders there that really are committed to investing in the space. And that's what we've seen. So now if you flash forward to where Buffalo is now, there's an awful lot of the economy that's driven through healthcare, right? And it's not just primary care and physicians. It literally is high technology and startups. And there's groups like Launch New York there, and Martin Levine, who's a great knitter of that community base, right, and knows everyone down the entire thruway, right, from New York City through Rochester and Syracuse, and has worked to really bring together all of these different groups to say, let's work together and play together in the same kind of sandbox. And I think it's been a success and it continues to grow, which is great to see. And then New York City, I actually worked with literally with Nancy Kelly and Bill Harvey and others in doing the New York Genome Center, right? And that was, it seems like ages ago, basically, right? But New York City and the investment you guys started here like in 2016, 2014 with EDC and some of the things from the mayor are now starting to come to fruition, right? So the parallels I see is that the challenge in Buffalo early on was we never had any space for chemistry, wet labs, or biotech. Now we do, right? And now you have ways for companies to start kind of in the center of excellence, move to other incubators in the area, and then expand into more space because the real estate is so cheap. And so that's what it was like to start a business in Buffalo. At the time, it was very difficult just in terms of finding what I call the mid-level of kind of biotech or life science employees, those that have had experience working in industry, because there's not a lot there, but there are places, and I'll take a step back. My move to Buffalo from New York City was because I was recruited by, at the time, Invitrogen Corporation, which is now Life Technologies of Thermo Fisher, and they had about a $500 million operation there doing cell culture related products that literally came from the farms of Grand Island based, right, and growing horse serum. And so that's kind of the genesis. And you had in Rochester, like the Bausch and Lombs of the area. And so now you're trying to find people that can work in biotech coming from those kind of industries. And you're finally starting to see that take place. And it was what I tell people is, if you ever go to visit Buffalo and meet the people, meet the community, it's a great place to live. And it's very easy to recruit people, especially if you have a great company and opportunity they want to work for, right? And I think that that was the hardest part is just getting them there. Once you get them there, they want to stay because of the quality of life. And I'm sure right now with this COVID situation, recruiting to Buffalo is an awful lot easier, right, than it was a year ago.
Yeah. We were there. NewYorkBIO did an event at the University of Buffalo, October of last year. And I was so sad. We had plans for multiple trips and, things to do in Buffalo this year. But unfortunately, COVID got in our way.
Yep.
We'll wait till it warms up.
Exactly.
But you look at upstate New York now, and you have everything going on in Buffalo, and Buffalo is not terribly far from Toronto, which has long been a center of stem cell science and other things. There's a JLabs in Toronto. You've got the Empire Discovery Institute in Rochester. So there's, people tend to look at New York State and just focus on the New York and gravitate towards New York City. But there's a lot in upstate New York that, I don't want to say gets overlooked, but, we're certainly not overlooking it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see some really good stuff come out of that. It's been exciting to see that happen. So to transition down to New York City, right? So first of all, what was the motivation towards kind of bringing Code Cause here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several different motivations, right? One is when we looked at it, so we looked at San Francisco, we looked at even areas of like Atlanta where the technology comes from. We have still operations down there.
Yep.
And New York City had a lot of things in its favor. I mean, one is first and foremost, the space available, right? So everything from BioLabs to BioLabs to BioBat to Downstate, there was just a plethora of places where you could actually start a company, have actual space, and actually have it in a fairly affordable manner. And it just so happens that for us, we were lucky enough to take advantage of Startup New York, and BioLabs has both brand new space, and this is a great place to be with great companies around the table. But also that Startup New York status is something that it really helps out a lot, obviously cutting down the taxes for employees in terms of state and local taxes and all the other benefits that comes along with it. So that was one aspect of it. And then also for us, we look at it from, at least I try to manage from a perspective of kind of 2 and 3 years down the road. And we're looking at where do you expand? So you have a place to start, but where do you expand to? And then all the work with like, again, Bill Harvey, and kudos to what they're doing with NewYorkBIO's over in Long Island City, as well as the Alexandria place going up over there. And then the Deerfield property, there's just going to be obviously a lot of space to grow into. And so as we look at what we're going to need from both a manufacturing perspective and a product development perspective, we're going to need a fair amount of square footage. And there is experienced players in the space that are going to have that readily available into design. And so that's something that, from a continuity perspective, made very logical sense. And the other aspect is, just to be frank with you, is our goal with this business is we're going to, one, need a lot of capital, and two, that more than likely we're going to take advantage of the public capital markets, and being in New York City is a great place to do that. And over the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, you're seeing a lot more traditional, I would say, biotech investors setting up shop here in the city based, right, and some newer ones. So whether it be kind of the Deerfields, the Lux Capitals, and Kazans of the world, there's just a lot of opportunity here on the investment side. So it has made very logical sense. Having been in other areas like kind of Buffalo and Atlanta, some of the challenges are getting direct flights and traveling back and forth. In New York City, even in kind of the worst of scenarios, always going to have a great transportation hub. And then also more selfishly too, from a standpoint of recruitment, I think you're seeing people move now outside of the Boston area, right, and looking to expand. And in fact, our head of R&D is a guy named John Michelle Grease that lives in Boston and will relocate to kind of New York City as we get up and running and further down the path. And it just shows that you can get top-notch talent to come to New York City because of, outside of COVID based, right? There's a lot of cultural activities you can take full advantage of.
Yeah.
And I think that all of that kind of sums up one of the reasons we came to New York City. The other area is in terms of clinical trials and access to technologies. I mean, with Columbia, so we have a bioinformatician that comes out of Columbia. They have a great program in there for that. NYU obviously taking advantage of some of the core facilities and research taken there in cancer. So it just makes logical sense to be around the hub of where the expertise is and some of the talent, because ultimately what's going to make this business success or failure is 2 things, right? It's team and talent, or I'm sorry, team and technology. And right. And so I think we take full advantage of the technologies around this area, and the team is going to be great in terms of what we have access to and can source.
Yeah. Listen, I just want to take the last 5-minute clip and forward it to myself in 2015. Because if you sent that to someone in 2015 in New York City, they would think you were lying or part of a commercial.
Yeah, it
because
wasn't
for
here.
the longest time, people said there wasn't enough space, you couldn't expand, the capital, the right kind of capital wasn't here. And literally what you just said is a testament to probably everything that New York has probably tried to do over I'll say the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Because the last 5 years, I think really a lot of it has hit the ground running and turned into a reality. But, over the last 10 years, people have been trying to do this for a decade. And this is really a testament to the fact that, the efforts were in the right place. And if you grind at it long enough, that it works.
I was
Now you're a
We should use the clip and send it to Doug Thede at the EDC and let them use it in a
I
commercial.
get it. We can do that. I think we should. I think that clip should be everywhere.
Yeah, and it was funny. I
We
was
can,
I was talking to Carlo just the other day, base, right, and it's telling him how much things have changed in this community base, right, from the standpoint of
Yeah.
what actually is really available base, right, and the other thing that I think goes, um, there's this conversion of technology, right? So I mean, with our business, we do an awful lot of sequencing and an awful lot of bioinformatics, and actually having things like Google and the Facebooks of the world resident in our community are going to be things that we can take, again, full advantage of in the future. And so I think that, over to your point, Derek, over this past kind of 5 years, I mean, it's been 10 years in the making, but in the past 5 years, you're seeing leaps and strides in terms of what actually is available, and can you really successfully have a startup in this expensive city? I think the answer is emphatically yes.
I think we have enough empirical data right now that says the answer is absolutely yes. You know, I bet you can look around BioLabs now and just you see the things that people are doing. And you know, one of the benefits, I think, is now you have startup companies that are around other startup companies, and that energy is infectious, right? You see these people that are, you know, genuinely doing stuff that's really exciting, and I think it makes you want to do more. So how has the BioLabs environment been for you? If we're recording commercials for New York City, we might as well get a good plug in for BioLabs as well.
Yeah, no, BioLabs has been great. I mean, we just lost director Nishta, basically, right? But she's been great, and the team has been great here in terms of just, one, keeping things moving throughout the COVID lockdown and making sure that, from a standpoint of this, obviously, public health and safety, right? That was first and foremost, and making sure that operations would continue, but also in a standpoint of making sure people were safe. And I think that to that extent, things have gone very well. Very few hiccups during the time. We opened our lab up again in July, like mid-July, and that's been going well thus far. Some of the things that obviously concern me and I think about is just kind of as we get into the colder months, what happens with transportation and things along those lines.
Yeah.
It's very easy right now, right, from the standpoint of people being able to take bikes and walk back and forth to work, and the trains aren't anywhere close to capacity base right now, depending on what line you're on.
No.
Yeah.
But go ahead. No, go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say, but you hit the nail on the head. As things start to open up, then you get more and more people. You fall victim to the law of big numbers, right? New York has a ton of people, and you know, more people are going to take the train, and that's challenging. How many people do you have in the lab now?
So right now we're just a handful right now, basically, right? But we'll
Okay.
be, the game plan is to expand that. And honestly, what we've done is we have luckily during this time of COVID been able to focus on a couple of things. One is diversification, right? So the Atlanta facility opened up in June, so we have redundancy on both different lab areas, and then
Okay.
also we have the ability to, we've taken full advantage of getting our product manufactured through contract research groups, right? So we have some of those contracts in place too, and they have redundancy in terms of their location. So we'll always have continuity of supply. And then in terms of even some of the both in vitro and in vivo work, we've identified suppliers out there that can actually maintain the studies. We transfer protocols. And so we literally didn't miss much of a beat during COVID. It's just trying to figure out kind of where to go and how to make it work, right? And it'll be interesting to see, like I say, what happens throughout the rest of the year and as we move forward. But I think we have a good game plan in place to make sure operations continue and we continue moving forward with the science. And I'm sure that, like I say, at BioLabs, with the management team they have here and everything in place, that we won't miss a beat with that either.
And another first, we had an anonymous attendee ask if CodeCAS is hiring.
Yes. So that's again, yes, we are, and we're hiring right now. So the kind of three key areas we're looking for are research scientists, right, with strong molecular biology skills. So trying to think how much I can tell. So strong molecular biology skills. We're looking for people with strong cellular biology skills, right? So things like we're developing a high throughput platform to evaluate. Let me take a step back. Our zip code technology is a lot like Legos, right? So the zip code is this synthetic fragment that allows us to be able to specifically hit a cell and integrate. But with that, we can actually then bind to it a variety of different, if you imagine, payloads, right? So everything from RNAi to CRISPR to lethal genes to cytotoxic agents. So to that extent, we want to start evaluating in a high throughput fashion the specificity and efficiency of transfection of these cells with our different payloads and different zip codes across different cell lines and even things like organoids. So people with flow cytometry experience we're hiring for. And I think the other area that's most important too are bioinformaticians. So we're literally doing a whole bunch of single cell sequencing as well as whole genome sequencing to evaluate the zip codes, where they are in the human genome, how prevalent they are, a lot of these different biological questions we're trying to ask. Those are kind of some of the key positions we're hiring for right now. So I would say that definitely if you're interested, feel free to drop us emails on our website. And we're actively, like I say, interviewing right now for those kind of 2 or 3 key positions.
Great.
Really, at this point, if we don't have a term sheet for you by the end of this webinar, I'm going to be disappointed.
just let me know the commission, Derek. What's the commission for New York Bio?
We haven't done it before, but I'm just going to keep raising the bar here.
There it is. You'll have a built-in sponsor.
Along those lines, we did have a question. And it says, what are your thoughts on hiring research scientists straight out of a PhD program, no postdoc or industry experience?
Yeah, so I will tell you, I mean, so here is what I think the company has to have a commitment to the community base, right? So in terms of what we did with, I'll tell you about kind of what we did at Empire, and then I'll tell you what we're doing here at Codicas as well. So we literally started programs where we hired people directly out of, for instance, SUNY Buffalo and other programs like that, and actually trained them. So that there is a blessing and a curse. That the blessing is coming out of academia, you kind of have the latest, obviously, in genomic technologies and academic prowess, but you lack in terms of development. So we'll teach you development as long as you bring the information and expertise you have to be able to make a functional kind of team member. And so we have that exact same thing here at Codicas. And I think that what we're looking for, literally right now, though, we would prefer someone with obviously some commercial experience, but it's not a necessity. If someone is inquisitive enough and obviously passionate about what we're doing, then we're willing to take, if I would say, kind of investment into personnel. And I think ultimately that goes back to the team, and we have to have that diversification. I tell people we can't be overly weighted in terms of potential, but at the same token too, we can't be overly weighted in people that already have and are entrenched in their commercial experience, because what we're doing, it truly is fundamentally different biology, right? And I think that how we actually develop this is going to require both some creativity, some outside the box thinking, and entrench that with a lot of the routine sort of obviously regulatory development, clinical trial processing, and selective of kind of markets that we enter. That goes without saying, but it's a long way of saying that if you are fresh out of a PhD program, but have some of these strong skill sets we're looking for and are willing to apply those, we're willing to take a look at you and take a risk sometimes.
That's great, thanks. And clearly somewhat, Bruce Toman, our guest, has clearly gotten a look at our draft email, and he is shifting us to our next questions, the type of questions we're gonna talk about. He wants to know how you found your seed funding, and if you're trying to raise funds, how that's going, and how is this going during COVID specifically?
Yeah, exactly. So Derek told you the story of us. I mean, so we raise these funds first and foremost internally with the company base, right? So we invest in ourselves to start the business, and then we brought around the table people that were 2 things. One is, again, passionate about what we're doing and realistic of how long it takes to be a success in this space. And so those are people that had either experience like Bob Easton in investing in early stage technologies and really knowledgeable about the potential for the technology and could add value, right? So in addition to the cash, it really is the network, the expertise, and the strategic thinking to say, you know what, Anthony, I know you guys have this as your game plan, but have you thought about A, B, C, and D, and figure out where that kind of goes within your strategic planning? So that's what we've done for seed funding. That's going well for us. And we've topped that up also with obviously non-dilutive funding. So we've been able to receive grants, and that's been a blessing for us as well. And also endorsement of the technology and how we're developing and helping us move down that path. And then literally over this kind of COVID period we've been going through, and we're in the process of raising our Series A. I would say that, listen, I take the adage of kind of gene and machine, right? So ABC, always be closing. And that's what I think the job of a CDO is. And so while we have some great traction right now, we're always looking for investors. So if there are people out there that, again, fit the mode of are looking for a game-changing, kick-ass technology and a team that is committed to making it happen and that's experienced in doing so, then feel free to reach out to us, right? Because that's what we're looking to bring to the table. And I think that it's all about the efficient use of capital. So we have some active discussions going with on the partnering side. I think that'll be additive, obviously, to what we do with our Series A, and then also in terms of how we move this technology down the path of commercialization. And I think that's it.
So,
If it answers the question.
Well, and one thing you think about the North, and you mentioned it earlier, JP Morgan. So we had JP Morgan, right, this year, because that was certainly.
Did we? I mean, it was like 2 years ago, it seems like.
This year? I think it was this year.
I know. It was this year. I'll go back and check my frequent flyer miles and see. That was probably the last time I flew. And so clearly there's a huge work stream that you hope comes out of right there.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, less than 2 months later. So how have you navigated continuing to build and keep up relationships and continue to fundraise through this virtual now mainly process?
Yeah, I would say, to be frank with you, we haven't missed a beat, right? I think what happens is investors, it's all about telling a story, having a relationship, and moving on that path. And frankly, I think COVID actually, because of the space we're in, right, this healthcare vertical, you've seen more funds being raised by institutional investors. You've seen even on the private side, whether it be family offices or even kind of the high net worth angels, they're continuing to do deals, basically, right? So for us, it's been a matter of just continuing with the pipeline, transferring to Zoom as opposed to doing any kind of face-to-face meetings, basically, right? And then just going through the diligence process, which is by its very nature virtual anyhow to begin with, basically, right? So I would say that there hasn't been a lot of hiccups from a standpoint of us being able to gain traction and continue to move down that path of diligence. But I think what happens is for the ones that are investment groups out there or VC groups out there that we haven't met with, it kind of is a slight lag, if you will, right? Because you got to get that first Zoom meeting on the phone, on the calendar. Once you have that, they have certain deals that are already kind of pent up in their pipeline, basically, right? So it's one of these things we're just trying to get within that workflow. But I think that in the space that we've been in, it actually has been very beneficial from a standpoint of trying to raise capital, continuing those discussions, and not really having, I recall during 07, 08, where literally people were so afraid on the VC side that they were stopping kind of doing deals. In this case, it's been the exact opposite. And I'm hopeful, right, knock on some wood, that continues, based, right? Because I think that is definitely a necessity. And something one of our investors we're talking to told us is like, listen, our horizon is 7 to 10 years. We have a brand new fund. So from that perspective, we're not looking at what's taking place right now in this disjunction. It really is about what takes place kind of over the next 4 to 5 years and where you guys in your development path. And if everything goes according to plan, we'll be in the clinic and moving down and being a successful business. Therefore, them making an investment now is actually right in accordance with their mission and their investment thesis.
That's great. So just for kind of the edification of the audience, what do you want your Series A to look like, and where does it move you in terms of clinical development? When do you get into the clinic? What do you expect your kind of Series A milestones to be?
Yeah, so I think there's a great question. So from a standpoint of where it gets us, so the Series A, our game plan is twofold. One is that there are some basic platform development things we're doing, right? From a standpoint, like I said, this high throughput screening, which are going to enable us to really get a strong body of information around efficiency and efficacy, which is then going to drive what we do in the clinic. So our timeline is pretty tight and straightforward because we think we have, when you look at kind of the technology and how it will be viewed by the agency, that it should be fairly straightforward, right? It's synthetic DNA fragments. That's a technology that's kind of, it's been used before. And then also the agents that we're going to look to deliver more than likely will be ones that have already been in the clinic. So we're trying to find ways to deliver that risk. And so within 24 months, our goal is to have our first IND filed. Now, in terms of how much we're raising, I'll be a little kind of coy in that one, only because that if you look at the zip code technology, it's a synthetic DNA fragment. So one of the things I'm looking to do is to raise a bit more capital, because I think we can take several, if you will, therapeutics to the marketplace with the same zip code and get more bang for our buck. We don't need double the amount of dollars to get 2 INDs filed, but we do need like an incremental 15 million. So for us, kind of the Series A is like that 25 sort of million range base, right? Which gets us in the clinic with 1. If you add another, call it 15 on top of that, you're actually going to have probably two INDs filed. And then with that, we'll have obviously some other partnering. We have a a lot of grants that we've written that'll start coming into fruition early next year as well.
Well, that's fantastic. And that's great. So so within COVID, have you found that your ability to reach people are you not really limited by geography? Are you kind of, across the country and worldwide with how you're thinking about raising this round, or are you maybe more locally focused? Do you feel there's an advantage to having your syndicate kind of closer from a geography standpoint?
I would say, geographically speaking, we are national, right? So we're looking at groups that are national. We've had touched on some international ones, like we have people like John-Luc Bellingard, who's one of our advisors based in France, and he's turned us on some other people over in the European context, right, that have capital. I would say that, I mean, historically, if you talk to us probably a year and a half ago, we were looking at probably bringing in some funds from Asia and things like that. But I would say now that's probably, in the current climate, kind of waned a little bit. But no, I don't think our investors have to be kind of locally right here in the Northeast region, because I think that, again, from a standpoint of how do you manage investments, I think there are many groups that are, whether they be in San Francisco, kind of the Texas area, or even down south in like Georgia, that are very experienced in managing investments, right, that are outside of that typical geography, whether it be a day's travel or not, they can do so. And many of the groups we're talking to have active portfolio companies in New York City or the area. So it becomes another one they can take full advantage of. But with that being the case, I think there are a lot of great groups here in the city that we're talking to that we'll see kind of how that actually develops. And I think from a standpoint of just the touch points, right, and the frequency of touch points being that there's one thing you can do via Zoom, and that's kind of the traditional, how do you manage an investment? But again, this really is about relationships, right? And what really we're taking advantage of, and we have with our current investors and the ones we're bringing to the table, is taking advantage of what they actually can bring to the table from a standpoint of strategy, a standpoint of partnering base, right? And really it's a standpoint of how do we actually kind of grow our business. And that's honestly where that proximity does add some value, because it's great to be able to go on the road and have a beer or have some drinks on a non-scheduled sort of time period that allows you to really take full advantage of that relationship.
So there's a couple things that you've done, and I'm really glad that you talked about the relationship angle here, because I think there's a couple things that you're involved with that are really important to that kind of gets you seen outside your company and outside of that. And the things that I'm thinking of here are programs like PeopleSeek that you're involved with, and our genome. And I wanted to make sure that we talked about these things because biotech is really kind of a pretty small pond, and people in and around the life sciences, they may not know you through your particular company, but the other things that you do in the community kind of get you well known. And we should talk a little bit about PeopleSeek, because it has really a bigger and broader impact than just thinking about sequencing people.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, so I'll give people the backdrop of it. So PeopleSeek is a project run by Dr. Robert Green out of Harvard University that is an NIH-based grant that is about sequencing normal populations to look at how they both manage their healthcare and how they respond to it over time, having that whole genome sequence done. And one of the issues with that project, along with many others, is that there is a struggle to get diversity and underrepresented populations into these trials. And so for me, everything is kind of like, again, it's full circle, and it's I like to look at what I do on the business side, similar to what I do on the personal side, and making sure those kind of work hand in hand together. And the interesting point is that, for instance, when Leon first came in with some of this technology, he was discovering an aggressive form of myeloma in young African-American populations in the Atlanta area. And that was kind of the genesis of how he started doing some of the whole genome sequencing on some of these patient populations. And lo and behold, when he's working on some of these trials with, like for instance, Takeda Millennium, they struggle to find African Americans to enroll in these trials, right? So it's the same story over and over again. There's the issues of distrust, there's issues of misinformation, there's issues of, frankly, not getting people that have embedded trust in the community and are part of that community involved in these actual projects. And luckily, PeopleSeek is one of the ones that has done so, right? And so as a part of my role being in the Aspen Institute, one of the projects I have in doing so is we created this project called Our Genome Project. And it literally is a documentary that we film people that are getting themselves sequenced, that are coming from all walks of life, from these underrepresented populations, to really tell the story of what were they thinking? Why they get it done based, right? What does it mean? And more often than not, we find that we get lost in the jargon of sequencing and right, these SNPs and all these mutations. But to the average person, that means nothing, right? What it really means is, what does it mean for our community? And I think that for me, what really makes it hit home is that I've had, and I do have relatives that have leukemia or have other cancers, and they're struggling to get bone marrow transplants, right? They're struggling to find donors, and it's not germane in our community to do that because it just is not something that we learn growing up. And it's not until we have these moments of crises that we say, oh, let's take advantage of it, let's do this sort of drive. And so what I want to do is be more proactive about it. And I think that literally, and this is what I tell kind of Robert and other people, it's not just about being subjects. It really is about being at the table and understanding that there's economic aspects of this space, right? So you talk about kind of how do you leverage and manage that data? What is the value of that data? Frankly, what diseases are being researched, right? So, I mean, there's a underrepresentation of research probably in areas like sickle cell that affect, again, minority populations more than majority populations. So what we're doing with both PeopleSeek and then what I'm doing with our Genome Project and other groups we're working with is trying to get that story out there around, let's get involved, let's get sequence-based, right? And then let's really start understanding what does it mean for our community and how do we actually leverage that in terms of the development of resources, jobs. And I'm really, again, passionate about kind of what we're doing here in New York City and can do, right? You look at things like, for instance, I was talking to a group that during this time of COVID, they have a program on Hot 97 where they actually go into like the Bronx and into Harlem and talk about what does COVID mean to them based, right? And what does it mean to not either have healthcare access and things like that. And I think that these are where the rubber meets the road and it hits home. And so for me, I encourage people to look at the PeopleSeek project, and then I don't know, the website for our Genome Project. If you can contact me if you're interested in getting sequenced or being a part of that. And literally what we're going to do with that is we're going to tour the nation at Boys and Girls Clubs, at historically Black colleges and universities, and et cetera. And it really is tell this story around kind of why sequencing is so important, what's taking place in your local community, how can you get involved with it, and then also broaden that discussion into one that is, you can be in science and have a living without wearing a white lab coat or being a physician based, right? And there are a lot of different things you can do, and I'm just a good example of that, or a example, I would say. I don't know if I'm good or not, but I'm an example.
You know,
do you feel, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was to say, last week, our guest, we talked about expanding the life science and being more inclusive, right, across life sciences and looking at early stage, right? And you just talked about Boys and Girls Club, right, which is high school, you know, middle and high school, and even elementary. And like, can this be another component of what we do in outreach in, you know, and talking about STEM education and interest in science? Can we also start making it more acceptable to talk about participating in studies and being open as a community to that?
Yeah, I think we definitely can, right? And I think that, I mean, again, kind of what we're doing with CODICAS is being creative with it. And I think you're going to see too, I'm fairly certain from some of the discussion we're having, diverse investor base that is going to be kind of inclusive of some of the, let's call it athletes and celebrities in the space, basically, right? So they've already started investing in technology, basically, right? And doing these non-traditional things. And so it's finally now getting to the lexicon, if you will, right, about kind of alternative investing and how can you actually build wealth. And I think that, to your point, Jennifer, healthcare, right, is one that affects us. I mean, it's the one unifying factor of all people, right? You either, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything, right? And so I think that really taking that a step further and saying, okay, listen, this is a huge marketplace, and this is the reason why everyone is having this discussion around universal healthcare, around the cost of drugs, et cetera, because there's a lot of money at the table right now that's being divided up, and we need to be a part of that. And so I think that there are some groups like out of Rochester, Boys and Girls Club, that have these, I think, very creative programs that are going beyond just sports and into entrepreneurship and
Yes.
beyond just kind of the cookies or the lemonade stand, and really looking at legitimate businesses race, right? And I think that these are the things you're going to see coming on the pipeline over the next, I would say, probably 5 or 10 years that are going to really start broadening the aspect of how people are getting involved in life sciences, technologies, and healthcare as a whole.
Yeah, and we're pulling together a task force, NewYorkBIO's, with partners across the state to look at the small piece that we can do, right? That we can work on as an association to encourage increased interest by communities of color in life sciences. And so obviously we'll follow up offline, but I've written down Rochester Boys and Girls Clubs as one to ping to see what their program is.
Definitely, definitely, yeah, definitely.
So do you feel like, just in general, do you feel like we're getting better at this? Do you feel like things are actually moving in the right direction? I mean, you now have kind of three, I'll think about at least three vantage points between New York City and Buffalo and Emory. Do you see elements of progress here? Do you feel like it's better than, maybe when you started at Empire a decade ago? Do you feel like things are moving in the right direction?
I'll put it this way. I think at the very least we're having a discussion, right? And to have the discussion is the first step in this entire process. And I think we have to make sure as a community we keep having that discussion, right? I don't think it's getting better from a standpoint of just when you look around the table, you still don't see enough people, right, that are representative of your community as a whole. And I think that that's a pipeline issue. That's an issue of both organization, right? So there needs to be, I think, a concerted effort to identify people to move throughout the ecosystem. And I'm hopeful, I would say that much, I'm hopeful. And I think that at the end of the day, as long as we keep having these kind of tough discussions and thinking about it from a standpoint of, I think twofold. One is there is an economic value for having diversity around the table, right? I mean, you think about it from a genomic perspective. I tell people all the time, and it's widely known, the biggest genetic diversification exists in the subcontinent of Africa, right? So smallest person, the tallest person, right? I mean, you go down the list. And so it's something that we're not tapping into. And I think even from just a purely selfish economic aspect, it's something that we should be tapping into, basically, right? And I think that when that discussion is starting to be had, then you're going to start seeing a lot more progress. But I think there's a lot taking place, right? And there is obviously at the bio head is obviously a Black female based, right? And I think that that's a great step in the right direction. And there's this lot of good discussions being had right now that I'm fortunate to be a part of.
I find that there's an energy that's associated with sitting down with someone where you're like, oh, thank you, this person gets it, right? And personally, I'm seeing more and more of these people where you start to talk about these topics and they're like, they're hammering, yes, we have to go to the communities, we have to do this, and this is important. And I think the more that we see that and the more people we see around the table that actually get it, and the more people that are pushing for these initiatives, I have to feel like we're going to be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell you kind of an inside joke, and it just came to our company. So we have around our table, we have, for instance, obviously Bob Easton. We have a great guy by the name of Walt Ogier, based, right, was the founder or CEO of Acetalon, and also Alexis Laisley and Steve Chang, myself, Leon, John Michelle. So we have a very diverse team, right? A Frenchman, Colombian, African-American, Chinese-American. And we say, so in our group, the minorities are the white males, but it's pretty funny to see. And it's not by design. It literally is about bringing great people around a table based, right, to have experience to add to the table. But I can tell you it makes for a much more diverse and broad conversation. I think that we're going to be better off for it. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, quite honestly, I've written down that we need to have you on again a year from now, because and quite honestly, I don't know if we should have you on a year from now to talk about how great Codicas is doing, or to talk about everything that you've learned from the PeopleSeek project, right? I mean, both of those. Obviously, we hope you do incredibly well with Codicas, but you're just doing so many things that I think can move the ball forward, both for patients and for the entire community.
That's what it's all about. I think for us, I mean, really is about kind of impact, and it's really about kind of how do we move the needle and do things that are non-incremental based, right, from a patient perspective and a care perspective. And I think that's literally what drives our business. That's our mission. That's what we're focused on. And we'll keep working hard at it, actually. And I'm definitely open, as you guys have other opportunity to talk to you. It's a great conversation.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, we've gotten to the point where you now probably have multiple resumes that are coming your way, and for our audience, we actually I'll post all these links. So I'll post links to PeopleSeek. I'll post a link to our genome, and I'll also post the link to the Codicas hiring opportunities. Anthony, this has really been fantastic. We get to see a lot of people, and through the stuff that we've done, we've seen a lot of exciting entrepreneurs start to come to New York. But in a lot of ways, you're just representative of something we hope we see more and more of, because you're working on things that could be massively valuable for patients and have a huge impact in health. And just to close things out, another question here. I promise we don't write these ourselves, but they say, are the previous sessions available on YouTube? And yes, we have our own YouTube channel. As of now, all of these videos are up on YouTube, and we should have this one up before the end of the week. So on that, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. You mentioned always be closing. Remember, second prize is a set of steak knives. So we wish you the best of luck with that, and I can't wait to see what you do. We're really excited for you, and we look forward to having you back on in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.